Thank you so much for coming. I don't know if you were all here, but Rosemary couldn't make it. She had a family issue, and I'll be presenting our project alone. I'm gonna start with a little story of how, but this Christmas I went to this party with my friends, and you can see some of them. And besides the fun part of hanging out with them, I get to meet new people, they're friends. And whenever I say that I'm a researcher of bilingualism, they all have stories that they want to share with me about the bilingual people in their life, or how they learn languages, or the ideas, question about how to raise their kids. And in this particular case, I met a father who was one who thought was incredibly wonderful that at his kindergarten, children spoke 9 different languages, and he kept telling me about how amazing it is that children are so capable of learning languages, that they are like sponges. And as he was saying this to me, I kept thinking, well, but they also have other conditions that we don't usually consider. And I'll come back to this story towards the end of the presentation. Um, but that comment made me think of our students. Our students were like those kids that this father was raving about. They grew up speaking 2 languages and often having to translate for their communities and for their family members. And somewhere along their path to us in college, we forgot how amazing they are precisely because of their ability to speak 2 languages. And to be fair, we professors are not the only ones questioning their bilingualism. Their families question both their English and Spanish when they cannot translate a 15-page long manual on how to file taxes at the age of 7. They start receiving those messages like, do you really speak English? Elementary school educators put them in remedial classes because they spoke another language at home. That also starts creating some insecurities. And when I talk to our colleagues, it's not rare for me to hear a version of what I'm going to share with you in the next slide. So what you're going to see in that slide is an email we received from a professor when we were recruiting participants for the research project that I'm going to be discussing today. We were trying to go to their class and recruit bilingual students. So when I put the word bilingual in my email to this professor, this was their answer to me. I'm gonna make it top. The use of the term bilingual is questionable among the students who speak Spanish. Not all of them speak it with full command. Let me explain. They may be able to hold an everyday conversation, but it is not Polish Spanish. So that was the answer that I got when I used the word bilingual, like a very emotional answer, right? And what are the assumptions behind this answer? So this person believed that in order to be bilingual, you you grew up with 2 languages. Probably, I don't know if they would consider me bilingual because I obviously have an accent when I speak English. They also think that in order to be considered bilingual, you need very advanced proficiency in 2 languages. And in a way, they are saying that the students are not ready for college in Spanish. And these are the ideas that we can extract from that short email conversation. And this is in stark contrast with what we know from the field of research of bilingualism. So, who gets to be bilingual? What we know from research is that bilingualism is something complex and dynamic. So, there are many different factors that can explain bilingualism. There is no one single definition. And bilingualism is a spectrum. There are many different ways of being bilingual. We use different criteria in order to classify these types of bilinguals depending on what we are discussing or researching. Age of acquisition is one of the main ways in which we divide uh, bilinguals, and we can classify them as early bilinguals or late bilinguals. When we learn a language roughly after puberty, we usually consider them late bilinguals. Notice that there is no precise age at which we say learning a language after 10 years. It's more or less something around those lines of puberty. Something happens, and if we learn a language after that time, the process is slightly different than if we learn it when we are younger. But even within early bilinguals, in the context of the US, we usually consider them heritage learners because besides having some linguistic knowledge, they also have a family and a community tied to that language that they learn at home. That's what we call them, heritage learners. And Bruce was telling me about this. With heritage speakers, there is a broad spectrum of possibilities. Some of them learn two languages since birth, and we call them simultaneous bilingual. Some of them learn a language at home, and then when they start going to school, they'll learn another one. We call them consecutive bilinguals. That's the case for many of our students who learn Spanish at home, and once they start going to school, they start acquiring English. And then if we think about them in terms of proficiency, we also get this broad range. Some of them understand both languages but can only produce the dominant language, English in our case, and we call them receptive bilinguals. And on the other side of the spectrum, some of them have very advanced proficiency, which means that they usually were educated in both languages, and we would call them balanced bilinguals. When we move to the late bilinguals, the second language learners, we call them sometimes, we also have different proficiency levels. Here, the ones I've include are based on the ACFL, the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages scale. So they go from novice, intermediate, advanced, and superior. And in order to make it to the superior level, you need years and years of higher education. If I were to give a Spanish test to my grandmother, who only speaks Spanish, she wouldn't probably make it to a superior level because she stopped going to school when she was 12 because of life circumstances. So just being native doesn't automatically give you the highest proficiency level. It is education. It is the type of language that we learn when we go to school. So if we go back to the idea from that email that students are polished enough to count as bilinguals, we see that it leaves out the majority of our students from the definition of bilingual. And the truth is that we have receptive bilinguals, we have heritage speakers, and we have late bilinguals, second language learners in our classrooms. All of them are bilingual in different ways. And what we need to recognize as educators is that that knowledge that our students are bringing to the classroom is valuable. And if we recognize them as such, we can build on what they already know instead of dismissing that knowledge. And because this language is also part of who they are and their identity. Now I'm going to move on to our research, which was funded by the National Science Foundation, and it's a collaboration between John Jay College and Ostos Community College. We have some data to show that even though we are all within the CUNY system, we are slightly different institutions beyond the 2-year versus 4-year institution. We're only a 30-minute ride on the subway away from each other. I think it's around 7 or 8 miles. But we see that John Jay has a lot more students than Ostos Community College, and that our composition demographics are slightly different. As of a year ago, 50% of our students at John Jay are Hispanic. It's almost 60% at Ostos Community College, which actually started as a bilingual institution. It is part of their mission. The bilingualism and Spanish is part of the mission of the Ostos Community College. And we're going to be focusing on criminal justice majors, which is one of our main areas at John Jay, and you can see the numbers are very different. We have way many more students at John Jay than they do at Ostos in criminal justice, and this is going to be reflected in the sample that we have from both colleges. That's why you see that we have a lot more students from John Jay than from Ostos. And John Jay, Rosemary Barberet, who should be here with me presenting, started the initiative of including courses that are not language courses in Spanish. So she's been teaching already for a few semesters her research methods on criminal justice course in Spanish. And there are a few other courses that were included, like Intro to Sociology, Intro to Political Science. So we are starting to offer some courses that students have the option of taking them in English or taking them in Spanish. At Ostos, that is not the case. There are not any courses in social sciences that are imparted in Spanish, which is interesting, and it's going to be figuring out why is part of our research, although I won't be talking about that part today. This is just to give you institutional context on our project. And now moving on to our goals. Our project is called Quienes Son, Assessing Language Skills, Belonging, and Identity of Bilingual Students Towards a Bilingual Education STEM Transfer Pipeline. And we had three main goals within this planning grant. Our first goal is to provide research on Latinx identity and belonging among Spanish-English bilingual STEM students at Ostos and at John Jay. We're both Hispanic serving institutions. So first, just figuring out who they are as students and how they feel, whether they feel that they belong in these institutions. Our second goal is to know more about their language proficiency in both English and Spanish. So we take them as a whole. We want to know how much English and how much Spanish they know in order to assess whether they are ready to take these courses that we would like to keep creating in Spanish. And the third goal is to evaluate the institutional capacity and identify best practices for creating a bilingual STEM transfer pipeline at Ostos and John Jay. Our goal would be to have to give the students the opportunity to take the criminal justice major in bilingual version. So some classes in Spanish, some classes in English. And we would like to create this transfer pipeline such that if students start their bilingual degree at Ostos, they can continue the bilingual degree at John Jay studying criminal justice. Going a little bit on the literature, we were wondering what was the role of language in the Hispanic serving institution context and belonging research. And it was very interesting for us to see that even though the Hispanic serving institution, like the Hispanic part, language is a very important feature of that identity, it is not prominent in the literature. And actually, this has been already documented. Research has stopped short of considering the role language has in creating more identity affirming pedagogical and institutional practice for native Spanish speaking able college students. And able means active bilingual learner, users of English. And they call us to recognize the pedagogical and institutional possibilities of recognizing students' full linguistic repertoires. And that's part of the first part that we want to help solve. So we want to see whether there is a relationship between Spanish in our higher education setting and their sense of belonging to the institution. For this research project, we had a research assistant who is a model of the students that we envision for the program we would like to create. So bilingual students that start at Ostos. Her name is Francesca Tapia, and she started as a student at Ostos, and now she's at John Jay as a transfer student. And I'm gonna let her explain to you what we have done as research. This video, she created it to recruit participants for our research project. And maybe if you can give me a thumbs up when, just to make sure that the sound is working.
You know how we always switch from English and Spanish and it's only English at school? Well, we're trying to change that. Hi, my name is Francesca Tapia. I am a student and research assistant here at John Jay. I graduated from Hostos and I'm now studying criminal justice at John Jay. Yo hablo inglés y español. I am a research assistant and I'm working on a project that's all about students like us. We're inviting all students to come and share their experiences as bilingual speakers. All you have to do is complete a vocabulary test and a couple fun language activities. Listen, there is no right or wrong answers. And if you would like, you could also come and join a relaxed group session with students just like you. You're not just helping with our research. You're also helping shaping programs and also supporting students like us. It's not a test, just your honest thoughts. You'll get paid $20 for a vocabulary test and also $35 if you join the group session. I don't know about you, but I could use that extra $55. If you ever wanted your voice to matter, this is your chance. I hope you'll join us.
She was instrumental in us being able to conduct this research. She helped us with class visits, email, flyers, phone hours. She called every single student. She called she spent so much time calling them to make sure that they would show up for the research. She also learned how to deliver this research instruments. She was able to do the survey and the proficiency tests. And because she's bilingual, she was able to do it both in English and Spanish. And she also helped us manage in the focus groups. So just to give you a recap of what we collected for this research, we gave the survey to 232 students. And as I mentioned at the beginning, at John Jay, we have thousands of students. At Ostos, they have around 600. So that's why you see a huge difference in how many students we got from each institution. We then gave them a language proficiency test in English and Spanish. If any of you have questions about that one, I can answer them in later after when we have a little bit of time. And we also did focus groups with some of the students at both institutions. 72 students participated. We've done some interviews. I think we have maybe 10 or 11 interviews with faculty and staff. And today I'm going to be focusing on the survey and the language proficiency assessment. We haven't yet got to analyze the focus groups. So let's see what do our students think about bilingualism and Spanish in school. When we asked the students whether maintaining their Spanish was important to them, the answer was categorical at both colleges, a resounding yes. I had asked this question to other groups of students, and the answer was the same, but I wasn't sure if I had a bias sample because I was asking it to my students in the translation and interpreting certificate, so they are already taking language courses, so they might be biased. These students that you're seeing here in the graph, they were all STEM students, and they all think that maintaining their Spanish is crucial to them. Then we asked them why. And we use the programming language R to analyze the initial set of, this was open-ended responses. The question was, why is maintaining your Spanish important to you? We haven't got to the fine-grained reading and doing the qualitative analysis, but we did broad classification using token-based analysis to find the themes of why they think it's important to study. And this allow us to visualize the main motivations across both colleges. On the left, we have Ostos. On the right, we have John Jay. And for example, we see that family connections, cultural identity were the most common reasons they cited as for why they think it's important for them to maintain in Spanish. And it's interesting to see that family appears to be a more prominent reason at John Jay than at Ostos. To really understand why, we'll need to look at it more closely at the actual responses, not just the token level analysis. And still, the overall pattern is clear. Family, identity, and communication are the top three motivations for maintaining Spanish. And career opportunities is mentioned much less often by only about 12% of students at each college. Then we asked them what they thought about how their professors recognize their bilingualism. So the graph shows students perceive how the students perceive whether their bilingualism is recognized by professors, comparing Ostos and John Jay. At John Jay, nearly half of the students feel that their bilingual skills are not recognized here. And while fewer than 1 in 5 feel clearly recognized, at Ostos the pattern is more balanced. Almost half of the students selected sometimes, suggesting that partial recognition, and about 1/3 feel that they are actually acknowledged as bilinguals as something valuable. Overall, these results point to an important difference between campuses. John Jay students are more likely to feel that their bilingual abilities go unnoticed, which may reflect differences in faculty awareness, classroom practices, or institutional culture around bilingualism. And then let's continue to how they use language across different contexts. So this figure shows how often students report using English and Spanish across different parts of their lives. On the x-axis, we have the different contexts: home, friends, work, and school. And on the y-axis, the probability of using that language. The boxes summarize the distribution across the students so we can see both typical patterns and variability. And what stands out immediately is that students are highly bilingual, but their language use is different across contexts. At home, it's the only context where they use more Spanish in blue than English. With friends, we see that they use both languages quite a bit, but the pattern is the opposite. They use a little bit more English. And that's reflective of everyday bilingual practices. But what's interesting for our study is what happens at work and school. In those contexts, English dominates very clearly, while Spanish use drops substantially and becomes variable across the students. Some still use Spanish at work or school, but many do not. This matters because it helps us to interpret the regression analysis that I'm going to show later. Using Spanish at school isn't just a reflection of proficiency, it's something relatively constrained to context and norms. So this figure sets the stage. It shows that Spanish use in school is not the default, and I want to zoom in what happens around here in the school setting. In this graph, we see how often students report to using English and Spanish in school. Across both colleges, English dominates clearly. Most of the students report using it always, as you can see with the yellow bar. However, when it comes to Spanish usage, it's a lot more diverse. Almost like more than half of the students say that they use Spanish sometimes or rarely in both institutions. A very few students say that they use it always. So in other words, while English is consistently the language of a school, and Spanish remains present but situational, used selectively depending on the class, the context. Those students, if you remember, we don't offer that many classes in Spanish, only 4 at John Jay and 0 at Ostos, besides the language courses that they can take. And this pattern highlights that bilingual students bring their Spanish into the college environment, but its use is not equally supported or respected across settings. In fact, the next graph is going to show the outcome of that lack of support that we offer to our students. So here we are seeing their estimated proficiency in English and Spanish. We map the proficiency scores according to the scale that I mentioned at the beginning, the ACFL levels, which will go from novice, intermediate, advanced, and superior. On the top panels, we have Ostos. On the bottom panels, we have John Jay. Across both colleges, English proficiency is consistently higher. We see that most students score at the advanced level. There are more students that score at the superior level in English at John Jay than at Hostos. Overall, we see students at John Jay have higher proficiency in both English and Spanish than at Hostos, which makes sense because, like I mentioned at the beginning, Proficiency is not only about using the language at home, it's also about how much education you have. And at John Jay, we have students that have been in the higher education system for longer. When it comes to Spanish, we see that most of the students are at the intermediate level, and there are very few at the superior or advanced level. So overall, our students are English dominant across both institutions, which was surprising to us. We were expecting to see maybe Spanish dominance at Hostos, but that wasn't the case, which reminds us of the importance of not just following the stereotypes in on what we know and actually measuring their language skills. My previous research shows that when these students take challenging content-based course in Spanish, like the interpreting course that I teach, they can move fast in just one semester from the intermediate to advanced level, which is remarkable. And this kind of progress that fast in just one semester is possible because they already have all that knowledge and experience in Spanish from their communities and homes. They simply need the right type of academic support in order to be able to develop to the next proficiency level. And what's even more striking, and from the previous research, and I'll show you a graph later on that research, is that even though I teach my courses in Spanish, and I measure their English proficiency, and their English also went up, which is going to be related to something I'll talk a little bit later. Now we move into our research question of the paper we're currently working on. The first manuscript from this project focuses on whether there is a relationship between a student's sense of belonging in the university setting and their bilingualism. As I discussed at the beginning, defining and quantifying bilingualism is not easy because bilingualism is dynamic and multifaceted. And for this reason, we look at different factors related to bilingualism. We focus on these two that we included in our analysis. So is the Spanish proficiency related to a student's sense of belonging, Spanish use in the school setting, recognition by professors, and college. And by that we mean, like, do we see differences between how students feel belonging at John Jay or at Hostos Community College? So let me walk you through this figure. Each dot represents an estimated effect of one of the factors. So Spanish proficiency, use in school, professor recognition, or college, while taking into account the rest of the factors. The horizontal lines indicate uncertainty ranges. And this vertical dash line indicates zero, meaning no effect. So if one of these lines crosses the vertical line, the no effect line, it means that that factor is not meaningfully related to belonging. So starting at the top, Spanish proficiency, it crosses this vertical line, which means that Spanish proficiency doesn't really matter for belonging. Being more or less proficient in Spanish doesn't change whether students feel they belong. And that's important because it tells us that belonging isn't about individual skills. What does matter is using Spanish in school. We see that this horizontal line doesn't cross the vertical line, which means that there is a correlation between using Spanish more in the school setting is correlated with having a higher sense of belonging. And that use is an interpersonal effect. It's about what students are allowed and encouraged to do in their daily interactions in the community, in the school setting. The third one, professor recognition, stands out even more. When students feel that their professors value and acknowledge their bilingualism, their sense of belonging goes up substantially. And that's an institutional signal to them, and it seems to carry real weight. And finally, at the bottom, this line shows that we didn't find any differences in belonging, sense of belonging at Hostos or John Jay. So the big takeaway from this is that belonging isn't about how good the students are at Spanish. It's about whether their language skills are put into use and they are valued in the spaces where learning happens. What do we take away from everything that I've discussed? Language proficiency is not relevant for sense of belonging. This doesn't mean that we shouldn't try to improve bilingual proficiency. That should be one of our goals, but it is not determining whether the students feel that they belong here. What does matter for belonging is whether the campus use reinforces learning through using speaking Spanish with peers and staff. We see that it strengthens the heritage language development and their sense of belonging to the college community. Faculty messaging matters. Students notice whether their bilingualism is recognized. This influences their engagement and is related to their sense of belonging. And just a general idea, language is a connector, and we should treat it as a skill, social tool, and a marker of institutional servingness. Let's not forget the Hispanic and Hispanic serving institution. So presentations usually end here with these conclusions. But I've noticed after presenting a few times on this project that people usually get the idea or are worried about using more Spanish. Does it mean that their English skills will start to melt? And it's that idea that I've got, or that question I've got many times. If we teach more classes in Spanish, it means that they take fewer classes in English. Will their English suffer? And it is an important question that we need to consider. And as much as I am Spanish professor, I know I wouldn't be fair to my students if I disregarded their English development. And the thing with language is that more quantity is not always graded improvement. And what we sometimes think as logical turns out not to be true. And I'll give you an example of something that looked logical centuries ago, and then we realized that it wasn't what it seemed. Um, Centuries ago, people walk around thinking that the earth was flat because intuitively we walk around and we don't feel that the streets are curved. But we researched, we found out that that wasn't the case and that the earth is round, except for a small fraction of the internet that creates conspiracy theories about flat earth. I see that bilingual education might have fall for a similar misconception. We think, okay, if I want the students to learn English, I need to teach more classes in English to them. But research tells us otherwise. Research with elementary school children. This is one of my favorite graphs, and if you've been to any of my previous presentations, I've probably discussed it before, but I love showing this research. So this is the average English reading performance, so standardized test that elementary school children need to take. In the colorful lines here, we have students that start first grade not knowing English. Obviously, their scores are way behind their average English counterparts. So this horizontal line here shows the native English speakers, monolinguals, their scores. Obviously, if I put a kid in first grade and after 1 year, they are not going to perform as someone who has been speaking English for 6 years. And then here, the different lines are different types of bilingual programs. And bilingual, I put it in quotation marks because the remedial models, their goal is English development, is not bilingual development. The only two real bilingual programs are the two-way dual immersion or one-way dual immersion. We see that for students that go to the ESL classes, and there are many different types of these programs, they never catch up. So they get more English classes than these students that go to bilingual schools that they take some classes in English, some classes in another language. It could be Mandarin, Spanish, etc. By sixth grade, the students that go to the the real bilingual programs, the dual language programs, they already catch up with their English counterparts. So it takes them 6 years to get there. But as they continue their education, their English reading performance is higher than those students that only take classes English and are monolingual English speakers. So remember, these kids take fewer classes in English, because they are taking classes in another time and they all have the same hours in school. So by learning another language, we're also exercising the muscle of language, and that means that we're going to improve our English. Whereas the kids that go to remedial programs that just want them to learn English and not take into account the language that they are bringing from home, they never catch up with the English monolingual kids. And I know you're smart people, and you might be thinking, well, that's in the K through 12 education. We have young adults, and the context is very different. And I mentioned this research at the beginning. This is what happened when I measured my students' oral proficiency in English and Spanish before teaching them interpret. They were in the translation and interpreting program. So it's before starting the program, after one semester. Here we have English in red, Spanish in blue, and the different proficiency levels going from intermediate high, advanced low, advanced mid, advanced high, and superior. We see that we have a range. These students shouldn't really be in my class because they really struggle. You need an advanced level in order to take in translation and interpreting courses. But we see that by the end of the semester, they improved both English and Spanish. Like no student was below advanced mid in English. They improve more English. I swear, I teach the classes in Spanish. And my colleagues in the translation classes is the same. Like we teach in Spanish. Their English improves. And it's because we're taking into account their Spanish, we're improving their Spanish, and it doesn't stay like in one part of the brain. And like, no, what you learn in Spanish, and you can then go and apply it in your English as well. And when I showed this graph to Alison Priest, our provost, a while ago, she said something like, "Oh, that's cute, but it's only 20 something students in one class. So do we really know whether like this is just you with your students, or is it an effect of bilingual education?" And we're getting more and more. There's not a ton of research on bilingual education in higher ed, but we're getting there. The first research that I study that I have here comes from Texas Tech University, and they found out that Spanish coursework is linked to improve persistence and retention. So students who take at least one Spanish for heritage speakers course show higher retention and persistence. So the benefits of taking the language course go beyond just improving your Spanish. You will also are more likely to stay in the college. The two bottom studies come from University of Texas, Rio Grande. They have like their percentage of Hispanic students, I think is 90%. So they have a lot of Hispanic students. In a study with a biology course, they saw that students who took the bilingual version of of Biology 101, and those courses I taught both in English and Spanish, versus the ones that took the course in English, the bilingual version students learn more biology. So it wasn't about learning Spanish, it was about learning the content better because their full linguistic repertoire was taken into account and recognized by the professors. And in another study from the same university, they have a whole bilingual program. They have a bilingual seal. The students get it in their transcript when they graduate. They do a ceremony for them. They have an awesome program. Students enrolled in bilingual courses have higher GPA, stronger retention, more favorable course evaluations than the students in monolingual context. And bilingual coursework is associated with improved Spanish proficiency, stronger peer and faculty connections, and greater sense of belonging and institutional attachment. And this is very recent research from that university. And I promised I would go back to that story about the children that are like sponges. So what do I tell people when they talk about children as sponges? I help them to see that the conditions that children have, adults often don't have them. So yes, it takes us adults longer to learn certain sounds, and we probably will never sound like someone who learned a language when they were a child. But children also have a lot of time. Their entire existence revolves around learning how to talk. And I'm going to tell you another story from this Christmas. This picture is my family. So, what you're seeing here is 13 adults standing in a cramped Spanish living room, holding up a phone from various awkward angles and trying to get everyone's eyes open at the same time. We were all screaming patata, which is the Spanish equivalent of cheese for photos. So just picture it, we all shouting patata, patata again and again and again for at least 5 minutes to get the picture. And we finally got the picture that you can see here. I was holding my 18-month-old nephew during this photo. And after we finally got the shot, we went back to playing. And all of a sudden, the kid started repeating patata, patata. We were all amazed, right? Like he had just learned a new word. We all love seeing how little ones learn new words. And we usually marvel at how children produce language, and rightfully so. But let's do the math of what it actually took for this tiny human to learn one word. So it was 13 people, complete and undivided attention, 5 minutes of enthusiastic, joyful repetition, zero other responsibilities. Someone else handled his travel arrangements, meals, nap schedule, diaper changes, absolute freedom from judgment or correction. No one went to him and said, you're pronouncing patata wrong. It's patata. Nobody said that. No judgment. And pure celebration and delight when he said it back, right? This wasn't probably even the first time he heard the word patata. He had probably eaten potatoes before, but it took a 13-person cheerleading squad, all focused on a single word to get him to produce it. And that was his only job for the day, learn how to say potato. Can you imagine how many words you could learn as an adult if you had 13 people cheering for you and helping you with one word? So if you take one message away from this presentation, let's remember that and become our students cheering squad. Muchas gracias a todos. I guess it's easier and you can see everyone. And we have, I guess, 10 minutes for questions. Mindy? We cannot hear you. You're on mute.
Okay. As a school psychologist, I was trained to understand that it takes 5 to 7 years for a child to develop proficiency in learning in another language. And so I think about two pieces of it. The hostos community is literally, physically, geographically, a community supporting one another and one another's growth and supporting, I would think, retention in school and giving peer mentorship much more than we would see at John Jay, which is a wider geographic community. So here's my struggle.
Mm-hmm.
Having switched from in-person teaching to online synchronous, where it's only the past year that the college community allows us to encourage on screen, on video. I don't even know by looking at my students who might be bilingual. I know
Hmm.
many students who are not verbally active, but that's always been the case.
Hmm.
Um, and I'm wondering whether the online modality makes it harder to draw out the novice learners who you were talking about, who might not feel so proficient in the verbal communication.
Yeah, I think that the online part, so it has given access to education to some students who otherwise wouldn't have access to, but it has also created a lot of challenges because it's harder for them to interact with each other and even find out who speaks what languages. But I think as professors, it could be one question that we ask them at the first day of class, because obviously, if you're not teaching a course in Spanish and you're not teaching a language course, your role as a professor is not to develop their Spanish proficiency, but maybe just letting them know and asking like who speaks another language, they will let you know because it's part of their identity and they want to share that. And maybe that helps create a small community. Like the first day of classes, and like if you're giving them icebreakers, you can ask like, what languages do you speak? Oh, that's great. Like it's like, do you use them? Where do you use them? Something like that. So they feel seen. So I am perfectly aware that we cannot all work towards developing proficiency in a language. That's our role at the modern languages department. But I think we can all create an environment, and this is what we're seeing from the research, that you don't need to teach them Spanish. But if you tell them, hey, the fact that you speak Spanish besides English is good for many different reasons, is valuable and is creating that community that supports their bilingualism. Yeah. James?
Thank you for that fascinating presentation. I had a question just about Ostos versus John Jay. Like, to me, it seems like we would have a lot to learn from Ostos as a fellow HSI because, as you pointed out, it's a bilingual institution. Um, but then I was kind of surprised to see that um, college was not like attending John Jay versus
Yeah.
Ostos was not a significant part of um, what made students feel like they belonged in college or at an institution. And then, even the faculty part of it, you would think that that would maybe carry over into the institution. Like Ostos might have more faculty who affirm multilingualism than John Jay or something like that. So I'm just wondering what you make of that. And then also, if there are lessons learned for us at John Jay from our Ostos colleagues.
Yeah. So we were also very surprised by that finding. And I think to really understand it, we'll need to dig deeper in the focus groups and the interviews with faculty and staff. Because from the survey data, we're not able to piece out why we didn't find that difference, even though we know that there is a bigger effort in including like using Spanish in the college setting at Ostos. Or maybe it's just that using Spanish, they might use it more, but using Spanish is the main factor, and it doesn't matter where you do it, whether at John Jay or at Ostos. We want to answer those questions, but I don't think I can give you a satisfying answer for now until we get to the more qualitative parts, and we'll be able to draw some lessons from then and understand what happened, because they used to have a lot of courses taught in Spanish. We think that enrollment was one of the issues. Like the Spanish courses were low in enrollment, and they stopped running them because it takes effort. Like you need to convince students that those classes are beneficial for them. And undoing that message is difficult because you have an entire society saying you don't know how to speak Spanish. This is America, speak English. you need to learn English. So if you know that you need to speak English very well, why would you take a course in Spanish? So explaining this research and making the students understand it so that they sign up for the courses takes a lot of effort that cannot be my job as an individual professor. We need institutional support. As part of this research, we went to the University of Texas, Rio Grande last semester, Rosemary and I, and we saw the importance. We were there just to learn how to teach the classes in Spanish, and what I took from that visit, I wrote a blog post about it, but the main thing I took from that visit is that it really takes a village and a lot of time. So so that's why I was telling Marisa that even like if you're not a high proficient speaker of another language, you can be of support for this community as well. Because the message needs to be repeated over and over and over. They even have a vice provost for bilingual integration. So that's like the level of institution. Like students need to feel that it's the message of the university. Like the fact that you are bilingual is something important. It's going to give you more job opportunities. It's going to connect you with your family. It's good for your brain. It's like you need to repeat that message over and over and over to undo the damage that society has caused to all of us. And probably that's like that message is not only for students, like we need that message for professors too, because I've seen, like you saw the email that I showed at the beginning, like that professor was bilingual. Like they spoke Spanish, and they even have this hesitation because the entire society has told you that, yeah, keep your Spanish at home. So undoing that takes a lot of effort. Long-winded answer. Sorry about that. Marisa?
So, as you said, I am no expert in this at all, right? I don't study language, I don't speak Spanish, but I teach at John Jay College, so half my students are Latinx, right? So it's
Yeah.
important to me. But my additional stake in this is that my office is across from Rosemary's in the
Mm-hmm.
sociology department. So I get a lot of the people that came to visit her and informally talk to them about the study,
Mm-hmm.
or I have my Spanish speaking students in my office and it's a recruitment tool for your study to send them across the hall. Like Izzy Taveras is one of my like
Oh, she was with me too. Yeah, she's
right,
great.
right. Okay, so my question is kind of from Izzy, but don't tell
Mm-hmm.
him,
Mm-hmm.
is that what are the colonial impacts from the research, right? Because um anecdotally, I have students that are like, ugh, all of the professors who teach the Spanish language classes are like Spain Spanish,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't understand what they're saying, or I don't like the way it sounds, or like they're like worse than white people, like things like that, right? Like so the colonial impacts, the power dynamics, and like I am not researching this, so with
Mm-hmm.
an N of, my students. They're Colombian and
Mm-hmm.
Honduran and Salvadoran and Puerto Rican and Dominican and Mexican and Guatemalan. But like, I can't remember the last time I had a European Spanish student in class.
Yeah, no, we
So
don't have any.
right. So this is just word on the street. This is a
Mm-hmm.
chatter. And I'm
Yeah,
wondering if you started to measure any of this, if it had come up anecdotally, if you know from your other research, if any of the follow-up instruments can make sure to like ask them about this, blah, blah, blah. I love what you're doing. I'm the biggest supporter. Thank you so much.
Yeah. I mean, that is a very important question. I am one of those people. I am from Spain. I am teaching my students who are from Latin America, and all of my colleagues in the translation program, full-timers, we're all from Spain. There is a reason why we are not trying to create a Spanish cult in the department. We are very aware that that is a problem. But the main issue is that there are no PhD programs in translation and interpreting in the US. There's two, Kent State and Binghamton, but they focus on literary translation, which is not what we do here. And most of people who have graduate degrees in translation and interpreting in the Spanish speaking world come from Spain and in Europe in general. So whenever we try to recruit people for translation, most of the qualified applicants are from Spain. But I can guarantee that the three of us are very aware of that fact, and we talk about it in class. Like we talk about how we use things differently, and even if so ideally we would want to recruit someone who is not, and we really try. Last time we hired someone, we really try, and there were no. We had one candidate who was invited to a campus visit and he didn't come. So it's just we don't have people. But I don't think because there are Spanish people who will still have that mindset of like the peninsular variety of the language is the best one, etc. But we've all been immersed in the Latin American community in the US for a long time, and we know it's something we need to address and discuss. And whenever I say a word that I know it's only used in Spain, I say it and then I ask them, like, okay, how do you say this in the Dominican Republic? How do you say this in Mexico? So we bring them as their terminology experts from their own countries, and we discuss that variety and the importance of being aware of the variety when they go and translate for communities in New York, where you're going to have speakers from many different sites, from many different places and countries. And so you need to be aware of different ways of saying things. And I think our classes offer that opportunity from, unfortunately, not from the faculty perspective. We just hired someone from Argentina who is gonna teach another a translation course this semester. So that adds a little bit. I know it's another white country, but we're trying. We're trying. Like if you know someone who is qualified for, like, send them our way. Mindy, you need to unmute
Yeah,
yourself. Yeah.
I have one other observation that's a little pertinent, I think.
Mm-hmm.
If we think about our chancellor's progression through the CUNY system, he started at Hunter,
Mm-hmm.
spent a number of years at Hostos, and then he went over to Queens College as president.
Mm-hmm.
Having been, I think he was president at Hostos, I know he was president at Queens College. I would be interested to see some research or have some research done about his influence in boosting Hostos as a community supportive of our learners, and where that's influenced his piece of keeping DEI important at CUNY.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know if that's something that we'll be able to piece out from our research. I will be curious to see whether in the interviews from Ostos someone mentions him as, I don't know, an encouraging factor. Their president is also bilingual. But I think that that piece, especially the part, like that goes beyond the scope of our we interesting. It's also important to have that representation at higher levels within the university. Yeah.
No, I didn't expect there would be anything out there. I just kind of prompt people's curiosity.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we're already 5 minutes past. Thank you so much, everyone, for your questions and for coming to this talk. And you'll know how to find me. Like if you like these ideas, if you follow me on LinkedIn or Substack, I talked about them quite regularly.
Great. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Gracias, adiós.